I'm sure Ben will join us in a moment. Yes, Ben indeed is on the way. Hello, Ben.
How's it going?
Praise. 1 second, sorry. Praise the Lord. Thank God. I'm doing well. My son had a friends night, pizza, soccer, but it was just it was like 20 10-year-olds running through my house for a while.
Sounds exhausting.
So that was, it was a good practice for me, running up the wall. There was wooden floors, new painted walls, but it's all good. My son is happy. He has friends, and cleaning the walls. It's not a big deal. So yes, so I'm very happy about that. It was nice to see his interactions, and a good week overall. Thank God. People are healthy, so I can't complain. How about you,
Nice.
buddy?
Yeah, no, it's been a good week. Sometimes when it's not too interesting, it's good. It's good to have sometimes quiet and normal times. Just in the house.
Yeah, definitely went outside. There's definitely a storm going on with regards. It's like if you just even think about the Zelensky-Trump conversation, you're like, even thinking about it is almost like I can't even get into it. Like just like if I need to think about if as humanity, if we're being required now to try to analyze not only our own lives and the news and geopolitics and other wars, but also JD Vance and him calling him out for not buying a suit. You're I don't know. It's a lot. But that's why, thankfully, we are finishing the 5th parak today. We'll see, but I believe we will.
Yeah.
Which is very, very exciting. The 5th parak is really the we spoke about this in the beginning parak, where there's in the first chapter where there's the sort of the first 5 chapters, and then there's the next 3, which are separate. So maybe we'll do that, and we'll go into that when we wrap.
Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Thank God, Baruch Hashem. Family's doing well?
Yes. I mean, why wouldn't they be?
People get sick,
Yeah.
People have bad moods, and just checking in, making sure all's good.
All's good.
All right. So we're gonna hit it.
And read first in the English, or
I'm gonna read first in Hebrew, and if you'd like to read in English, you are welcome to read this first portion in English.
okay.
You ready for that?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm gonna take it first in Hebrew. וכן בדברי אדם כולם אין צריך שידבר בהם אלא במה שיביא לנפשו בו תועלת, או ירחיק חזק מנפשו, או מגופו, או בחוכמה, או במעלה, בשבח מעלה, או מעולה, או לגנות, או לגנות גנות, או מגונה, כי כללת בעלי החסרונות וזכרם לגנות, אם יהיה הכוונה בו לחסרם אצל בני האדם, עד שיתרחקו מהם ולא יעשו כמעשיהם, הוא דבר מחויב, והיא מעלה. הלא תראו, אמרו יתברך, כמעשה ארץ מצרים אשר ישבתם בה, לא תעשו. וסיפור הדומים וכל מה שבא במקרא מסיפור בנות בעלי החסרונות וזכרם לגנאי, ושבח הטובים והגדלתם. אין הכוונה בו רק מה שזכרתי לך, עד שימשיכו בני האדם אחרי הדרכים הטובים האלו, ויתרחקו מדרכי הרעים ההם. Take it away, Kirk. Well, Ben will set you up. And shalom, RJ. Go ahead.
Similarly, in regards to man's conversation, he should speak only of those things that will be conducive to the true welfare of his soul and body, or that will tend
a little louder, Kirk.
Okay. You need me to repeat from the beginning, or?
Yeah, you're sounding very low.
Similarly, in regard to man's conversation, he should speak only of those things that will be conducive to the true welfare of his soul and body, or that will tend to avert injury from them, whether his words concern themselves with science or virtue, or praise of virtue, or of a virtuous man, or censure of a vice, or of a vicious person, for to express contempt for those who are loaded with vice, or to depict their deeds as contemptible, if done for the purpose of despairing them in the eyes of the other men who may avoid them, and not do as they do, is indeed a virtuous duty. Does not Scripture say, after the doings of the land of Egypt ye shall not do, and after the doings of the land of Canaan? Also, the story of the Sodomites and all the passages occurring in Scripture which censor those laden with vice and represent their doings as disgraceful, and those passages which praise and hold them the good and high esteem endeavor, as I have said, to induce man to follow the paths of the righteous and to shun the way of the wicked.
To shun the way of the wicked. I like to shun the way of the wicked more. Shun the way of the wicked. Okay, so Maimonides in his classic way. Just even when he talks about dibur over here, speech, we just have to realize again, and we spoke about this in the past, Ben, as you recall, which is like unlike in Greek philosophy, right, which really, and even though of course Rambam also values the abstract thoughts, right, which is more elevated, Judaism specifically does emphasize, right, the unity between the physical and the abstract realms, right, which we achieve through speech. Right, so that's why he's talking about this dibur over here, which is just important to pay attention to, right? Like we speak a lot in this little corner about the logos as like abstract reason, right? But we see it as really the spoken word, right? Which is again, and other Christians see that as well, of course, not just Judaism. So again, it's important to remember that the speech really is something that is also very much a distinctive trait that we have, which is different than the animals, right? Which is like we can, of course, express ourselves. And that means we could, when we're expressing ourselves, we're many times at our best conveying very deep or spiritual or emotional meanings, right? And that's like very, very important. Now, I'm trying to think if we should do this. One more thing about speech, about dibur, which is also that if you look in the Torah, Rav Shirky also pointed this out. If you look in the Torah, that dibur, speech, is really, it's reserved for really very profound moments, right? Like you hear people speaking in the Torah, like Adam and Eve and the snake are speaking, but it's not dibur. You don't have that usage. The first time you see that actually is when Cain is attempting to speak for murdering Abel, right? That's the first instance of dibur. And it shows that like how speech, if it's not used for a higher purpose, can actually be like destructive, right? Like if you don't use your speech properly, ultimately. And really what Rambam is trying to like tell us over here is that when you're using your speech, right, it's not just if you have an effective speech, it doesn't only mean like what he says over here, which is like praising virtues, right, or the ganot, or condemning vices that you see, but it's also providing actual examples. See, like if you see someone doing something on the street, and it's very much as when we educate our kids, don't do like them, yes, do like them. These are things that we want to show people. It's not just talking about this, like saying like this behavior is nice. Explain this to a kid, or explain this even to adults. Like I want to see how it actually manifests, right? So and we spoke about this in Pirkei Avot, have mitavek be'avak raglahem, right? Which is like you want to be around these righteous people because you also want to see how they behave. Famously, there's the rabbi that would sleep under his rabbi's bed, right? Because he wanted to really l'shameshato, right? To be like, the squire is the wrong word, but really to like his understudy, his shadow, to really understand how this person behaves more than just how it's written, how these things are written in the text, but how they play out. Right. And he gives us over here, obviously, the stories that the Torah gives, like reward and punishment, right? Which you really learn these lessons. And he gives the example of Sdom. He gives, of course, the example of Mitzrayim, right? Which is the Torah is mentioning to you. I'm not just giving you allegories over here, but there's actually historical events that are really illustrating these moral behaviors and the spiritual truths that come from them, right? So when he's mentioning these things to them, this is the example, right? Look at this and realize this. And, these kochot nefesh, we have these strengths inside us that sometimes they really need, and this is nothing that, of course, the news that I'm saying, we hear this in this little corner all the time, but how being enchanted or stories really need to engage with different emotions and the imaginal. And of course, the Kuzari talks a lot about this as well. But how, giving these stories or giving these examples are the best way also for humans to be able to learn.
Right. That is how you use fiction as well, right? Or any kind of story, a narrative, is to be able to have something that is a little closer, even though it's still reading something, it's a little closer to an embodied experience. Because in a way you are, when you are given a specific example, when you see it, obviously it's one thing and you're in the moment, it's more visceral. But also when you're reading about a particular example or seeing a movie and you're seeing the characters interacting with something, it's embodied in a sense that is less or more than theoretical, right? And it gives you, right? I think there are studies or people make point of people that read fiction have better emotional, can empathize better. Or I think also when you view certain things or when you interact with certain things, it can make changes in your brain in terms of neurons or a mapping of space and information in a way that's kind of like a little bonkers. But that means that when you collect stories, it actually makes changes in your brain that kind of affect of how you, even almost in an embodied way, affect how you perceive things.
Right, and this is touches up, but like with archetypes and like hyper truths and things like that, right? Which are stories like packed on top of stories that like really, this at some point it becomes sort of the operating system that you're looking at the world through, right?
Yeah.
Or Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, right? As we say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kirk, any thoughts, complaints, demands?
Nothing particularly.
All right, we will continue on. וכשישים האדם כוונתו על זה העניין, יבטל מפעולותיו וחסר מאמריו הרבה מאוד, כי מי שיכוון על זה העניין, לא יתעורר לפתח הכתלים בזהב, או לעשות ריקום זהב בבגדיו הנאים. האלוהים לא יכוון בזה להרחיב נפשו כדי שתבריא וירחיק ממנה חוליה, עד שתהיה בהירה, זכה לקבל החוכמות. והוא אברהם, זיכרונו לברכה, דירה נאה ואישה נאה, ומיטה מוצד לתלמידי חכמים, כי הנפש תלעב ותעקר המחשבה בהתמדת עיון הדברים הקורים, כמו שיעלה הגוף בעשותו המלאכות הכבדות, עד שינוח וינפש, ואז ישוב למזגו השווה. כן צריכה הנפש גם כן להתעסק במנוחת החושים, בעיון לפתוחים ולעניינים הנאים, עד שתסור ממנה הנאות, כמו שאמרו, כי הווה חלשי רבנן מגרסהו, הווה אמרו, מילתא דבדיחותא, bedichuta. We discussed this. We'll talk about this again, but we spoke about this in the past once about laughter. ויחשוב שעל זה הצד לא יהיו אל רעות ולא מעשה הבל. רצה לומר, עשיית הפתוחים והציורים בבניינים ובכלים ובבגדים. Okay, wow. Ben, you want to take this, or do you want to read?
If Ben wants to read, he can. I'll read if he doesn't.
Sure, I'll take this one. If man has this as his ideal, he will dispense with many of his customary deeds and refrain from a great deal of ordinary conversation. He who follows this line of conduct will not trouble himself with adorning his walls with golden ornaments, nor with decorating his garments with golden fringe, unless it be for the purpose of enlivening his soul and thus restoring it to health, or of banishing sickness from it, so that it shall become clear and pure and thus be in the proper condition to acquire wisdom. Therefore, our rabbis of blessed memory said, it is becoming that a sage should have a pleasant dwelling, a beautiful wife, and domestic comfort. For one becomes weary, and one's mind dulled by continued mental concentration upon difficult problems. Thus, just as the body becomes exhausted from hard labor, and then by rest and refreshment recovers, so is it necessary for the mind to have relaxation by gazing upon pictures and other beautiful objects, that its weariness may be dispelled. Accordingly, it is related that when the rabbis became exhausted from study, they were accustomed to engage in entertaining conversation in order to refresh themselves. From this point of view, therefore, the use of pictures and embroideries for beautifying the house, the furniture, and the clothes is not to be considered immoral or unnecessary.
Big. First of all, you could see over here, echoes of Jordan Peterson, "Clean Your Room," right? Which you don't.
Or make it beautiful.
Right, or make it beautiful, or make this area beautiful, right? So,
so he's hitting this point. He made this point before, right? Of like, if you feel sick, look at a beautiful building, go spend some time.
Well, as far as using depression, right? Go exactly. So this is really, again, Rambam emphasizing like the importance of the aesthetics, right? Which is like, you got to recognize, and he's of course recognizing that there's, external motivations sort of can really shape our environment, right? And they could also influence our ability, ideally, to think clearly. And you could see, so first of all, by doing this, again, he's stressing that there's nothing outside of God's essence, right? His realm, right? So even aesthetics, if approached properly, right, with the purpose to attain wisdom, then of course you could do that, right? That's Rambam's like the most important thing, right? If you're attaining this wisdom.
Yeah.
And he's mentioning, obviously, if you have a disorganized environment, or I used this once in an article about like architecture and fashion, about like, your clothing have to be clean. And if you're in a place that could hinder your thought process or create like, your feng shui, your flow inside the house, it's very important that it's done in a proper way, right? This is also something that the Gaon Vilna would also, it was very important for him to have like a very clean house, and he was known to have a very clean house if you want to have a spiritual sort of, and for a spiritual environment and have like intellectual clarity. Also, it was very important for him to have that thing. And Rambam, if someone's interested, does explore this more in the guide to the Perplexed. The Gemara, the Talmud, also they discuss. In Jewish law, we discuss with regards to aesthetics, at least, that if you are, how far, like the regulations of how far you place the garbage, let's say next to a cemetery, or, you have to make sure you have a beautiful city, so you can't have the garbage like too close to the front gates. So the Torah also is already aware of this. And we of course, we know this. Gold doesn't matter to God, obviously, right? But yet we see in the temple, it's very important that there's a lot of gold elements, because there's a recognition, right? On the chest plate of the high priest, these are gems, because there's an appreciation to the aesthetics of the world we live in. Of course, right. There was the Talmud also mentions how one shouldn't focus on in diaspora, in exile, so to speak. People shouldn't be focusing on or rectifying their aesthetics, right? Because the idea is that your goal is not to stay there permanently. And that's not true to non-Jews, of course, but as far as Jews, the idea is to not invest so much with regards to aesthetics over there, because it's like an anchor. And there is these families in Morocco. This is at least what I was told back in the day, that they wouldn't plant trees or wear any green because it symbolized, let's say, the shrubbery and the foliage of Israel. And they're waiting only when they come back can that actually happen. Right?
Yeah, I've heard also stories of people like painting a wall. It might be like the eastern wall. They would paint it, of the house. They would paint it, but they would leave one like slice of paint.
Oh, we still do that today, right? But that's Zecher LaChurban, right? Because the temple is destroyed. So you still live in an area like that. I would say that Rav Kook famously spoke about how when they built the school, the architecture school, Betzalel, Rav Kook spoke over there and said how, the return of to the culture also of the aesthetics and the beauty. If you could start, if a country could get to that place, this is again like the footsteps of the Messiah, like, the Hebrews taking sort of being back in the land, taking back, going back to their roots and to their sources, and that allows them to express this true, Hebrew culture, which includes fashion and architecture and aesthetics. Again, obviously, are little hints of this happening.
I actually have a question related to that. In Judaism? So I don't know how familiar you are with like broader philosophy of aesthetics, but like in Judaism, is there a concept of the sublime that people I don't know if you know who he is, like Roger Scruton was an English philosopher who talked about this, and Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant and others. They had this aesthetic concept called
Sorry, Kirk, you were just cut off. Maybe it was Shami. Can you say that again?
I said there's many philosophers like Roger Scruton, who is a British philosopher of aesthetics, and Edmund Burke and Immanuel Kant and others within Western philosophy. Is there a concept like that of the sublime in Jewish philosophy and aesthetics?
I don't know if there's like a philosophy around it. I mean, we're talking a little about it right now as far as beauty, but
Tiferet is like the only thing I don't know if that matches, or I wouldn't necessarily know what sublime it means in a technical term, but yeah.
I could check, look into that for you though.
Okay, yeah, I might look into that. Within like Western philosophy of aesthetics, there is a concept of the sublime, which is like, as I understand it, it's like it induces awe, but I forgot the exact specifics of it. But there might be something like that in Jewish sources. I just don't know specifically.
Noted.
So I think,
what's up?
Another point, and I think we're going to keep harping on this because it keeps showing up in different places and in our discussion, because the Rambam also brings it up, and it's also related to the parasha of this week, the Tzaveh, I think. Like you said, it talks about the bgadim, the clothing of the Kohen, of the priest, the high priest, and how he should be dressed. And so obviously there's a question. I don't know which commentators, but I've seen in a lot of different places of why do we need, why do we dress him up? Couldn't he just, they come up with something like, why was it so important for God to specify like this and this, he should look? And how does that jive with humility, for example? Right. So we were talking, and Rambam is giving a similar idea here, and also about other things, that in a sense the clothings are a compromise, or they are something that for the people it's important because they need to recognize, because it's important for people. Clothes are important for people, so they need to be able to see that the high priest is important. But if they were maybe on a higher level, the implication is that they wouldn't necessarily need it, right? And it's the same here, where it's like there's you can have it, but the implication is that you don't necessarily if you were in a higher level, you won't need it. But then again, there's this higher level that might be that you integrate it. Again, we could have spoken about it, but
Right, that goes back to the Ramchal talking about his different stages, right? So there's the Chassid, but ultimately there's the Kadosh, right? And the Kadosh, the Holy One, No, the Hasid, like the Essenes, retracts, right? I'm going to keep away from certain things, different restrictions, to get to a place where he's holy, ideally, where then he realizes how to embrace all these things, right? The Nazarite comes and brings a sin offering, because ultimately, while he reached a holy state, nevertheless, he had to deny himself from something, and that's not what God wanted, right? God created this world to be appreciated. We spoke about this 2 classes ago about Yilta, right? The famous example of Yilta and Rav Yochanan. There was something I was going to say. What was I going to say? Yeah, I saw Yon, so we were just, Yon God, I hope you're doing well and the family's doing well. But maybe we've mentioned this once in the past where you were in the stream, you're just also like in mathematics, right? Like there's concepts like chaos theory and like other, obviously there's different phenomena that people are more qualified to talk about, but they're not necessarily rooted in like causation, but they fundamentally have I would say, and people are welcome to correct me, I believe what's underpinning them is symmetry, right? And symmetry does act in the language of aesthetics, as far as like it does bring like a mathematical order to beauty, right? So like we know about this also as far as people being attracted to people. If there's like a symmetry after your face, right? People really enjoy that or attracted to that. Obviously in architecture and in design, I definitely feel that both when designing and also just the expression you get from clients, right? When something could just be like a little off, right? Or something's exactly right. I guess. So that's with regards to the aesthetics, even though we didn't cover the sublime. Rambam does, like we said over here, he does mention the laughter. And I said we're going to get into the milta de chuta. I'm sorry, I'm stuttering over there. It's just in Aramaic, and it's a longer word. So, right. So we spoke about this in the past, that basically how laughter helps us expand our capacity of acceptance. Really, it allows us to break through like different like mental limits at its best, right? So when rabbis would grow tired, it wasn't that there was like a physical fatigue that they would need, right? Because they could have said that when they grew tired, why don't they just go take a nap, right? Instead, they would reach these certain, when it meant they get tired, they reach the intellectual sort of capacity boundaries, right? And then by laughing or by making a joke, this allows them to like break the mold and introduce like a new paradigm, so to speak, which in the Torah you could see as like Sarah's laughter, right? Sarah laughs because she hears something that is like, I can't even believe something that could be true, that I'm going to be pregnant right now. And by doing that, it's sort of the response was laughter, because it realized like there's a new reality I can now comprehend, right? And having this new understanding gives us joy, which I think many of us experience, like when we hear or learn something new or understand something at a very deep level. There's a sense of I don't know if we stop and laugh, but I've definitely found myself laughing at times.
Interesting. So I mean, laughter jokes is essentially breaking the mold, right? Like breaking,
but not moshav letzim.
Exactly. So I mean, in the Ramchal, we talked about it in moshav letzim or leitzanut, or like levity. But the function of laughter is still So it sounds like the function of laughter could be neutral, right? It can break the mold, and then you're stuck in this boundless place, and your morality goes awry, right? Because the jokes put you in this clown world, right? And if you stay within it, if you sit in it, like your whole world, you think that the joke is the world, which is kind of like what the Ramchal is saying the danger is. But here, the Rambam is saying that the rabbis would use that to just break the boundaries of their thinking, and then quickly use that reframe for study.
Exactly.
Cool.
Right. So of course one has to be careful how they use this tool.
Yeah. It reminds me of a classic, cliche, a classic trope, in movies where, somebody, there's like two characters and they're trying to figure something out and they can't figure it out. And then, like 2 minutes pass and then one of the characters says something completely off subject. Maybe it's even a joke. And the other person laughs, and then he kind of like,
he stops for a
second.
second.
Right. What did you just say? You said right? And like something in this thing that was completely off the mark, not related, like a word suddenly got them to solve some kind of mystery. I wish I had a specific example from a movie, but yeah.
Do you remember the TV show House, like House MD?
The what?
The TV show House.
I know of it. I haven't seen it though.
Oh, so like every episode, he would fall downstairs. He'd be like, "Stairs! No, the cure for cancer is like," it was just like, it was very on the nose at some point. Yeah. All right, Himshachnu. This we read. Yeah, you scrolled that up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Vidah.
Vidah shezot hamadriga hi madriga elyona. מאוד וחמורה, לא ישיגו אלא מעט, מזער ואחר הרגל גדול, right? וכשיזדמן מציאות האדם שזה עניינו, איני אומר שהוא למטה מן הנביאים. זה לומר שישמש כוחות נפשו כולם, וישים תכליתם ידיעת השם יתברך לבד. ולא יעשה מעשה קטן או גדול, ולא ידבר דבר, אלא שהפועל הוא, או הדבר ההוא, מביא למעלה, או למה שמביא אל מעלה. והוא יחשוב ויסתכל בכל פועל בתנועה, ויראה אם יביא אל התכלית ההיא, או לא יביא, ואז יעשהו. Who's taking it? Kirk or Ben?
I can continue. Know that to live according to this standard is to arrive at a very high degree of perfection, which in consequence of the difficulty of attainment, only a few after long and continuous perseverance on the paths of virtue have succeeded in reaching. If there be found a man who has accomplished this, that is one who exerts all the faculties of his soul and directs them towards the sole ideal of comprehending God, using all his powers of mind and body, be they great or small, for the attainment of that which leads directly or indirectly to virtue, I would place him in a rank not lower than that of the prophets. Such a man, before he does a single act or deed, considers and reflects whether or not it will bring him to that goal, and if it will, then only does he do it.
Can you scroll down a little more? One second. Now scroll back up. וזהו אשר ביקש ממני יתברך שנכון עליו ואמרו ואהבת השם אליך בכל דברך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך וכל חלקי נפשך שנעשה תכלית חלק ממין לתכלית אחת לאהבת השם יתברך. Go back up. I mean, they're all connected, but I just think it's such trouble to the Almighty requirements according to the words. Okay, 7. Let's go back up. All right, whatever you could say there. Okay, so how should we go about this? Right. So again, classic Rambam. He starts with his classic saying, which is all about the knowledge of God. Right. We're going to keep on saying that again and again and again. Right. The apprehension of God, understanding of the divine. Well, not the divine, of understanding of God. And again, he concludes what we've mentioned in the past, which is a person really needs to ask himself before every action, right? Is this bringing me closer to God or not? Right. And there's, you could sort of see him, we could tease out 3 different people over here. There's we'll start from the bottom. There's what he calls in the Guide to the Perplexed and other places, the behemah, right? Like sort of like the animal, the beast, right? This is like the lowest level, right? This is someone who he's drawn really towards everything, even if it's harmful to them, right? And this is someone that is he just follows his desires blindly, right? And obviously he doesn't have any proper discernment how to make these decisions, right? Then we have the classic man, the Adam, right? Which is like this middle level over here. This is someone that he did have like even if I don't have an elevated consciousness, I still could have some sort of reason, even if it's in moderation, I could still discern certain elements. And then there's what he says over here, right? That this is a very high standard to achieve, right? To arrive at this perfection. This is what Rambam calls in the guide, in the Moreh, the guide to the perplexed, Elohim, right? This is someone that through his emotions and his speech and his aesthetics and even his humor, like we were talking about earlier, right? This person could still, it's all directed towards God. And such a person, Maimonides talks to him about like as an Elohim, right? Which is someone that really reaches this very, very high level.
Well, Elohim is like a person of authority, right? So it seems to be like he's also maybe using it in terms of like this person has authority over himself in a way that is complete or as close to complete as possible.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Okay, I hear that as well. That's a good interpretation. By the way, we also see this in Samuel in the Bible study. The people that partake will remember that the witch of Endor, right, when she sees King Saul, right, she sees, I see a godlike person. Elohim ra'iti olem min adama, right? We know it's obviously not God, but she sees someone very godlike or very godly, right? And we spoke about how, according to Maimonides, really only 4 individuals read this, right? The 3 patriarchs and Moses are the only people that reach this level. We spoke about this last week. However, Rav Kook, in his classic fashion, it's a wider blanket, right? This generation, we're talking about people that have a higher potential to achieve higher levels of appreciation and closeness to God. And while they might not be like the patriarchs, nevertheless, they could still really attain like extraordinary levels of spiritual closeness and connectivity towards God. But so this, of course, leads us to a deeper understanding of what Maimonides talks about, which is his general philosophy, which is, the emphasis that we have towards a singular goal, right? Which is, as we spoke earlier, very heavily influenced by Aristotle, right? Who saw this as the ultimate pursuit, right, of wisdom. And this is sort of what I was reading on. We see that Maimonides goes further and he brings a verse from the Torah. Can you scroll down?
Yeah.
He uses this all to get to this point, right? He says this is all you have to be about. The Tanua you have to be to get to this point. But as Yaseh, right? He'll be able to discern and get to this point. The reason I laid out these 3 people is just to remind us of like these different individuals, because here he starts with the highest individual, right? Because he starts saying like this person, that's the Elohim already. But I'm just focusing right now how like all this ultimately we could say like a lot of this is coming from Aristotle. So the next pasuk is actually where Rambam comes and brings in, right, where he says like, such striving, right? If you want to do this, we don't have to necessarily do this through the idea of Aristotle, right? Rather, we have this verse, right? Let's continue reading this portion is over here. Thou shalt love thy Lord, thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might, right? That is with all the facilities of thy soul, each faculty having its role and having its sole ideal, the love of God, right? Which is, if you look at this though, 2 things. One, what he's doing over here, every time it says bechol, right? Every time we have this word over here, with all in English, right? This is really indicating that that every, like he's saying over here, that every aspect is is for the singular purpose. We could, of course, ask that Maimonides is talking about wisdom, and here we're talking about the love of God, not the knowledge of God, right? Here it says, right? You should love, right? We're not talking about you should know. So in the Sefer HaMitzvot, right, the book of the commandments that Maimonides writes, he talks there about how the love of God is really the pleasure that one gets when they comprehend intellectually, right? They get to these higher levels of apprehension, and that is their love towards him. Now, not to be so cold, if you look at that, if you truly understand someone, right, you could appreciate him in a much deeper level. So I would say it's not my mind is just sitting and making equations. It's when we talk about love thy neighbor like yourself, right? V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. If you truly understand him, you could truly appreciate him, and you could truly see him, and then you could really love that person, right? Because you truly see yourself in him, and vice versa. So it's just, I'm trying to give a warmer interpretation towards this Rambam movie.
That for knowing.
What?
You're trying to make knowing a little warmer?
Yeah, just knowing a little. I mean, I'm saying even the Rambam says knowing is the love of God. Like love is knowing God, right? So I'm just saying the knowing is more than just like reading your metaphysics. It's also
right. Yeah, I mean, you can make that idea with theory of mind, right? Like knowing somebody, having their theory, like having a theory of mind is being able to step in somebody's shoes, at least mentally. So you can relate that to again being empathetic towards people, and to predict what they would feel. You need to be able to step into their head and know them in that way, and that would require some emotional intelligence as well, loving them as well to an extent. I mean, if those are all things that could be related to each other.
Yeah, well, it's about. I mean, again, this is why only the person that would be dubbed Elohim could do this, right? Which is like even the loving one's wife and having children and loving those children honestly is because you recognize the divine in them, which is the divine in you, which ultimately is like the singular purpose, which is like this family unit is working together, or ultimately to unite with God. Right now, it's hard to always be thinking that, and hence we're discussing what the Rambam again. He's saying that very, very few people can reach that level. Of course, Rav Kook says, as a generation, more of us are there. But let's continue from the Kvar Hizhir. We said right, to love God. The Kvar Hizhir Navi, right, the prophets already told us about this. Right? ופרשו חכמים ז"ל ואמרו אפילו לדבר עבירה. Okay, big stuff. ורצונם לומר שתשים לפועל ההוא תכלית, והיא האמת, אף על פי שיש בו עבירה מצד אחד. וכבר כללו החכמים ז"ל, זה העניין, כולו בקצרה במילות מועטות מורות, על זה העניין. זה העניין, הוראה שלמה מאוד, עד כשאתה תבחן המילות, איך סיפרו זה העניין הגדול והעצום כולו, אשר חיברו בו חיבורים ולא השלימו, תדע שנאמר בכוח אלוהים בלא ספק, והוא אמרם בצבאותיהם, וכל מעשיך יהיו לשם שמיים. וזהו העניין באור נהר, וזהו הפרק, וזהו שיעור מה שראינו ראוי לזוכרנו הנה, לפי זאת ההקדמה. The end, I believe, yes?
That is, yep.
The end. Okay. What's our timing? Like 44. Ooh, Okay. So let's read it.
I'll just go through it.
Yeah.
This is the prophets similarly urge us on in saying, in all thy ways know him. In commenting upon which the sages said, even as regard to transgression, meaning of the ritual or ceremonial law, meaning thereby that thou shouldst set for every action a goal, namely the truth, even though it be from a certain point of view a transgression. The sages of blessed memory too have summed up this idea in so few words and so concisely at the same time elucidating the whole matter with such complete thoroughness that when one considers the brevity with which they express this great and mighty thought in its entirety, about which others have written whole books, and yet without adequately explaining it, one truly recognizes that the rabbis undoubtedly spoke through divine inspiration. This saying is found among their precepts in this tractate, and is, let all thy deeds be done for the sake of God. This then is the thought we have been dwelling upon in the present chapter, and what we have said must be considered sufficient for the needs of this introduction.
Okay, so we're only going to touch about it here.
Yeah.
People could explore more the idea of this kind of transgression, right? That could align with the divine plan, right? This is what Maimonides is, the Rambam is introducing us here to, and we sort of, by understanding this idea of like a transgression for heaven's sake, is really also realizing that there are trade-offs in the world, right? And each choice we make, right, it involves giving something up that's also valuable. There's examples you could see, biblical examples of this, of Abraham leaving his house, right? Leaving his father's house to go forth. He's on his whole mission, right? But what about respecting one's parents, right? His father's still alive, he's still with him, yet he's leaving.
Yeah.
And of course, famously, Joseph being sold by his brothers, right? Which is, even though it's like rooted by sin, right? Eventually, it serves a greater purpose. And that's also what he literally tells his brothers, that you guys wanted to harm me, but God had a greater plan. Now, one could argue and say like, okay, so what you're saying over here is that like, I could transgress and, it's for heaven's sake, it's all good. The issue is we can't, at the time of the transgression, we can't comprehend and know necessarily what what the outcome is going to be. And only once we repent from that action can we look back in retrospect and see like, oh, it's got us so far, right? So I would say that I'm sure there's alcoholics that love where they are right now, and in AA can look back at certain things, but they have to be removed in theory from that situation to appreciate where they've come, right? And only once the brothers in the Joseph story repented can Joseph actually tell them that this is what he actually feels. So this is very, very, very difficult.
Right.
Now
maybe it's worth just. And you gave an interpretation, like a lofty thing, also just like to the Dvar Avera, for the transgression. But I think also it might be worth noting, like it says in the footnote here, is that there is an interpretation, or the English already gives this interpretation of like this refers specifically to ritual ceremonial law. So if it's something, so it doesn't give you a carte blanche to like do whatever, like the means don't justify the end. But if you need to break the Sabbath which is breaking is a transgression in order to do something good, then that's something that might be valid, or it would be valid. So yeah, there's different ways of looking at this if people are trying to.
I think that's a very good point, Ben, because again, we have to caution against misinterpretations, right? We're not saying that you should use this concept to justify sinning. Right. And we're not saying that, we know figures like Shabtai Tzvi and others that obviously caused a lot of damage with ideas like this. And that's why, again, like it's really about understanding that this sort of the greater good can be achieved only once you detach yourself from that sin. There's a famous story that I've spoken about in the past in these circles about the story of Moses' death, which is a fantastic story. But there's a whole dialogue back and forth with God, and every time God gives a reason to why Moses is dying, Moses has like some answer back for him, and it gets like very intense. It's very dramatic. And ultimately, God responds to Moses saying, like, it's time to die because you killed the Egyptian, right? When he saw the Egyptian hurting the Israelite, you killed him without my divine permission, right? So, the weight of the action that you took, you weren't thinking about it, right? So Moses counters him and says, like, what do you mean? Like, you killed all the lives of the firstborn of Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now God replies back to him that I take life because I have the power to give life and restore life, right? So at that moment, Moses is silent and he dies. And you could interpret this based on what I was saying, which is once Moses realizes, like, first he was thinking that, like, I killed the Egyptian. That's also part of the plan of, like, punishing the Egyptians, right? So, like, why am I not part of the plan? Once God tells him, like, no, dude, there's, like, yes, I'm punishing them, but even them too, like, there's the concept of a resurrection also that I could play with. Moses then realizes that he's still connected to the sin because he hasn't fully understood the greater good that God had in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And once he did that, once that realization happens, his soul could finally come back to God. Again, it's a beautiful, beautiful story how that happens. That was really, just with regard in correlation to our story over here. But really, what he focuses on over here, which is interesting, is how impressed he is, if you noticed, with the summarizing of what the sages did over here, right? Which is they condense, like, this complex idea, right? That all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven, right? And he loves this, right? Because his attitude is, and this is a dig at Aristotle, right? He writes the whole book of ethics, and here they do it in 5 words. What's more impressive later on is Solomon, right? He does this as well, but he's almost in Proverbs, right? We said
before, not later on.
What do you say?
You mean before Solomon does it before either Aristotle or
right? And he does it in 3 words, but he's a prophet, right? So
right.
That's how he was able to do this. But again, the ability, what he loves of here, the ability to distill, right? These concepts.
Yeah.
He's super impressed with this, and we know how impressed he was with Aristotle, right? He understands that because of this, it says that they must have had this divine inspiration, right? The Ruach HaKodesh. Otherwise, how did they compress so much in so little? And one more thing about when we say Shamayim, which means sky, but many skies, it's like in plural. But in Hebrew, we spoke about this, how Shem is like Leshem, for what, right? What's the purpose of something, right? When something has a name, it has actually its purpose that it's fulfilling. And this really is our task, is to unify all the different options and the various paths, right? And unify them towards, like, a single goal, right? So we're supposed to take all the different Shem and make Shamayim, make what, like, make the multiplicity and unity equation over there.
Interesting.
So having said that, we just spoke about how, and this is what I started today with, how, the Rambam really divided, and this is also to RJ, so listen in, into 2 different sections, right? We have the first 5 chapters, which are like focusing on the, let's say the foundations, the underpinnings of morality. And then the chapters are really like additional moral questions, or it's like an appendix sort of to the early discussion we have. But RJ wanted to have a discussion, or not a discussion, he wanted to do like a summary of what we spoke about. So I thought that getting to the 5th chapter is a good time to do this. So in the first chapter, we spoke about the Achdut HaNefesh, right? The unity of the human soul, right? And that's really about, you could have thought there's, multiple different conflicting souls, so to speak, or how people taught it's really one unified soul, and how important that is for moral behavior and responsibility, right? Otherwise, I could say, like, oh, that was my anger soul, that was this soul. Really, all my actions stem from one source, and I have to take responsibility for those things, which leads us to the Perek Sheni, the 2nd chapter, which was the concept of free will, right? So obviously, I need free will to be able to make decisions. And the argument is that because I have free will, I can make decisions between good or bad, and then I could take accountability for the things that I'm doing, which segues into chapter 3, which let's say we could call the discernment chapter, right? Which is, now that I have the free will to choose between good and evil, how can I discern between good and evil and different moral behavior and how I'm going to do these things? And last chapter then is chapter 4, would be, if I made mistakes, how do I rectify these imperfections, right? Or what we talked about, the netiyot, I'm leaning towards certain certain tendencies. How do I rectify these imperfections in my soul, right? So we spoke about that. And then in this chapter, in the 5th chapter, I would say we spoke about the mountain, right? The summit, the life goal, right? Which is like, what's the ultimate goal we have, and unifying our goals, they should align with God's ratzon, with God's will, ultimately. And this, I would say, highlights why it's important for us to have a moral goal that highlights, our direction sort of in life, and how we live a moral life as well.